Yeah.
It's a cheese.
All those, all the other ones.
I don't.
Okay, like.
Takes damage and burning times. All favorites use.
Because I think the hardest bit of the test. Was like the. Short answer, feeling kind of better. But you don't have to not strong, but more like.
All right, good morning. Nice to see you. Everyone hanging in there, doing okay? Not too bad. Hopefully the exam went well for all of you on Monday. On my end, it went really well. A lot of you did fantastic. I'm gonna give you some statistics just so you can kind of see where you fell in relation to everyone. But really, as a class, just really impressive, really nicely done, as I would hope. When you have your notes and your book and everything at your disposal, but still, so the high score in here was 100, and there were 4 people who got 100, right? So that's fantastic. 4 people, 100%, a lot of A's, a lot of A's. The average score was a 93.2%. So a lot of people in the 90s, which is fantastic, makes me really happy to see. The low score was a 59. Right, and the average amount of time that people took was 61 minutes to take the test. So overall, again, what I saw on my end was that a lot of you clearly understand the materials, did really, really well. A lot of you should be very happy with your scores. And so that makes me really happy to see. So hopefully you felt good about the test. We do have 2 more of them, right, throughout the semester, and they were very similar, the same like format and style. You'll have a study guide just like you did for this one. So if you did really well on this, you know, clearly what you're doing is working for you, and keep doing it. If you wish you had done a little better, now is a fantastic time to kind of change things up a little bit as we move into the next unit. But like the vast majority of you, you know, pats on the back, you did really well, which again makes me happy to see. So hopefully you're feeling good about that. You'll be able to use your notes and book on the other tests as well. So again, similar style and format. And then what we'll do from here, if you're looking at the syllabus, this unit will move into somatic disorders, which we start today. And then we go to mood disorders, suicidality, eating disorders, substance disorders. And then you also have that second part of the paper that'll be due in like the middle of October. I can't believe next week is October. I mean, I've been decorated in my house since like August, so I feel like it's been like Halloween for a long time, but next month is officially October. I can't believe that. Like when I see you next, it'll be October. It's officially candy eating season. I'm ready. Not that I haven't been working on it for like a solid month already, but officially. I don't know, any thoughts, questions, comments, anything about that or about anything in general before we jump into our next unit? I'm hoping to have a guest speaker come in this unit on suicidality. I'm still trying to work with the health center on that, but they often come in and speak, and I'm trying to organize that. But otherwise, some really interesting topics. This one, I'm going out of order, but it segues really nicely from the last chapter. So our last chapter was about stress and trauma. And stress tends to play a really big role in these disorders. So I think it's a kind of a natural next topic. And then we'll go back to chapter 6 after this. But what we'll look at in chapter 8, we're going to look at disorders featuring somatic symptoms, sometimes called somatoform disorders. The names in this chapter are a little obnoxious at times. It's like somatoform, somatogenic, like psychogenic, like they get really similar, but we'll talk about the different disorders here, the causes and treatments and so on. And so when we're looking at the disorders in this chapter, again, they're kind of used interchangeably. So the old name was somatoform disorders, which is used a lot still, but the newer name is disorders featuring somatic symptoms. So I will use those a little bit interchangeably, but soma means body. Bless you. So these are basically disorders that feature symptoms in your body in some way. Okay, and in some ways they're very common, and some of them are a little more rare, which we'll talk about. But these are physical illnesses, physical problems, physical ailments that are caused by like psychological factors, often stress or maybe even trauma, right? So they're kind of linked to what we just covered. But with the disorders that we're going to cover in the slides today, these somatoform disorders are things that you're not necessarily doing on purpose, with the exception of one that we'll talk about when we get there. But you're not guiding or wanting these symptoms. So these range from things like having like stomach aches and headaches, which are really common, to making yourself go blind or lose sensation in a part of your body, which is much less common, but we'll talk about it. In general, though, you're not doing these on purpose. It's your body responding to emotional and psychological stuff, right, in a variety of different ways. Now, in the past, these were called hysterical disorders. The word hysteria is a fascinating word. It has a really rich history, and I'll share that with you a little bit. But if we look at the word hysteria, it's common use. Okay, so hysteria. And it's common use. Like if somebody says to you, you're being hysterical, right? Like, or like, you're hysterical, calm down. What we mean is that you have like too much emotion. Like your emotion is excessive. So you can say emotional excess. Like basically like calm down, you're being hysterical, right? That's how we tend to use it in a very common way. But the history of this word, wild, okay? So if we go back to like the 7th century, so way back, like hundreds of years at this point, it was a medical condition. So if somebody was hysterical or suffered from a hysterical disorder, it was a medical condition only affecting women. And the reason that it only affected women is hysteris translates to uterus. Okay, so this was a medical condition that only affected women because women have a uterus, right? And it was thought to be like a cluster of symptoms that affected a woman medically. Now it takes an interesting turn as we get to the 19th century. So quite a few years later, all of a sudden, instead of just a medical condition, this became a sexual dysfunction in women. So it was thought that the uterus wasn't functioning properly or was like out of place. And it became a sexual condition that women required treatment for. And again, here's where it starts to get wild, things you might not have thought you would learn about today. In order to receive treatment for this, a woman would go to her primary doctor. They would put her legs up in stirrups and they would manually massage her, right? Like manually massage her clitoris for 30 to 45 minutes to cause a frustrated arousal to put the uterus back in place. Okay, it wasn't thought at the time that that could lead to an orgasm. So you were arousing this woman, but not letting them reach orgasm. Now, a lot of women did, but we didn't know that at the time, right? And so women lined up for this treatment, right? The demand for this treatment was through the roof, to the point where the doctors couldn't meet the demand. And we're starting to develop issues in their hands and arms from manually massaging these women for hours upon hours every day. Again, things you didn't think you would learn today, right? So in response to the demand, the vibrator was developed. It led to the development of the first vibrator, which was called Granville's hammer, after the doctor who invented it. But this vibrator was developed to help meet the demand of all these women who were sexually frustrated and suffering from hysteria. Okay, so again, the vibrator developed to deal with hysterical reactions in women. Granville's hammer was the first hand-operated vibrator. The first one before that was steam-powered and was the size of a room. Can you imagine? Right? I teach human sexuality, so this is like not abnormal to me to talk about it at all. But again, Granville's hammer to help deal with this. There's a really interesting movie called Hysteria that was made. It's like 15 years old at this point, but they actually show this whole thing. They show the development of the first vibrator. They show these women going in and lining up for this procedure. It's quite comical, actually. I would recommend it if you're interested in knowing more, but quite a turn, right? From how we use it today to this, right? So when somebody calls you hysterical, you can just think about that in the back of your mind, like Granville's hammer, right? After the doctor. And then it took one more shift, kind of a little closer to today in the 20th century. It went from a sexual condition to a psychological condition. And it was something that Freud studied pretty heavily. Freud was obsessed with hysteria. Freud and a doctor named Charcot that he worked quite closely with, but they would do things like hypnosis and mesmerism to help people who were suffering from hysteria. And it was primarily women, right? But that was more a product of the time than anything else. It could be men as well. But what we saw is it became this psychological disorder where people were manifesting physical symptoms due to like emotional stuff. And that's a little bit closer to where we get to somatoform disorders, but a very rich history. You're welcome, right, for that random information to share with you today. Tempted to show you the clip, but I'm not sure I have it with me. What a shame for you, right? You're going to go watch, look up Hysteria. It's a really interesting movie if you are interested in more. Okay. Any questions at all about this? Anything at all here? Yeah. That it's still right to help with the demand, right? You could in a way, right? I guess that is true. It was like the third electrical appliance developed after a vacuum, just as a random like piece of information for you there, right? But yeah, the first one steam powered an entire room. It's just wild to like. I'd be terrified to get anywhere near it, let alone like, you know, people who used it. That's just terrible. But this was the first one that was like handheld, right? All right. So if we look at the disorders that fall in this category, there's kind of like two main ones, and one of them divides into like two different patterns. But by far the one that used to be called hysteria, the one that was viewed as a hysterical disorder, is called conversion disorder. And this is a very interesting and wild condition. It's completely unconscious. You do not in any way do this on purpose. And oftentimes people aren't even aware that they're doing this. But a conversion disorder is when you take something that happened to you, some kind of psychological event or stressor, and you convert it, hence the name, to a physical symptom because you can't deal with it emotionally. So this is usually something very dramatic, which is why it came out of hysterical disorders, right? It was a very dramatic presentation. And so oftentimes this is something along the lines of like somebody witnesses something really, really traumatic and they lose their vision, right? Again, without meaning to do it, without wanting to do it, you might not even have any awareness that you've done it, but you start to lose your vision. Or you lose sensation in a part of your body. It becomes paralyzed or you can't move it. You lose your hearing, right? It's usually losing a sense or like a motor function. It's some kind of like neurological thing that happens and it's completely outside of your awareness. So let's say you witness something like incredibly traumatic. What you might end up happening is your vision starts to fade a little bit. It's almost like it goes blurry and then it goes out completely. You would go to a doctor, of course. Like if you lost your vision, you wouldn't think to go to a therapist. You would go to a doctor. They would run tests on your eyes and everything would be completely normal. You would respond to stimuli. Everything would be like it should be, but you would have no vision. All right. And so there are like cases of this that pop up in the news periodically. There was a soldier, this was like 10 years ago now. There was a soldier who accidentally shot a young boy in combat. And he started having problems in his finger and his hand, and it moved up his arm, right? So his finger started going numb and he couldn't feel it. And then it became his hand, which we call glove anesthesia. And then it started moving up his arm. Now he went to a doctor and they ran every test on his nerves, on his hand, on everything. Nothing was wrong. But when they probed deeper, it started with his trigger finger was where he started having the issues. And it was due to the trauma of shooting this little boy. He couldn't handle it. And so he converted it, manifested it as a physical symptom. Again, pretty rare. And the wildest part of it is once you realize that you're doing it and you work through the trauma, it'll come back, right? And it might take some time, but it tends to come back. Yeah. Yeah, right. Does it still happen? For sure. Yeah, this is a actual thing. Sometimes we like refer to this as like mass hysteria. There was an episode of old show. I don't know if any of you ever watched House. I used to love that show. But like there was an episode where somebody gets sick on an airplane, and because one person is sick, everyone thinks it's contagious, and they all start getting sick. This is kind of like that mentality. It's like that mass hysteria mentality is where this comes out of, where you can convert your anxiety and stress into physical symptoms, right? It's like if somebody around you is sick, you start feeling like you might be sick too. There's a little bit of like psychological element to that. Yeah.
So well, I had a question that moment kind of answered it, but the examples you were using were all about like loss of something, like loss of sight, loss of feeling, loss
Yeah.
of feeling in the body. My question was like, does it develop as something else? But honestly, like it's like thinking that you're sick is not like a loss of insurance. So I guess
Yeah. It's more common that it's very dramatic in nature. It's just kind of the nature of the disorder is that you make something into like a dramatic symptom. But it can be less. It can be like on a lesser level, just like manifesting symptoms when there's nothing there. And you're not doing it on purpose. Like you don't even know that you're doing it. And again, when you are aware that you're doing it, it oftentimes reverses it. Which is, to me, it's just the fact that you could do this without meaning to, that you could cause yourself to go blind without meaning to is wild, right? Yeah.
This isn't exactly on topic, but are we gonna talk about the dancing plague?
The dancing plague.
I remember sometimes in the medieval era, there was a group of people, like in a town of sorts, who one of them started just dancing, actually schmoozing, I mean, in the middle of the street or something. And then people saw that and then joins them.
Huh.
And all of a sudden, eventually, there was like a massive group of people just dancing for no reason. Just
Sure.
like rave style dancing. And some people died from that.
Wow. No, I didn't know about that. It reminds me of like a TikTok thing, like, you know, like something you would see. Like one person starts dancing and everyone joins in, right? I mean, that's just like that group mentality, but that they kept. I don't know a lot about that. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, Tribute to look up. That was famous.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know a lot about that. That's wild though. Talk about it like a group think mentality. Yeah. Yeah.
It was like an example used for hysteria.
Yeah.
Apparently some guy started dancing on the street and then it was like a demon possession and then you're all possessed.
Yeah.
Hysteria and I started dancing with it.
Right. This reminds me of like, this all reminds me of how many of you read The Crucible? Right. Like with, you know, like it's just that mentality of like people get swept up into what's happening. And they get that like hysterical reactions. Like it's very along these lines, a little different. This is more like medical stuff that happens, but it's very much along those lines of like mass hysteria, which are like it's something that still happens. Like people tend to respond you know, to things that are going around them. They like join into it even when it's not even their thing. It's wild. I have a video of this. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good, I think. It's from King of the Hill. But there's an episode where Hank witnesses his mom having sex and he goes blind from it. Now, it never happens this quickly. If it happened this quickly, people would get the connection. It can take days, weeks, even months for people to develop like a slow reaction. His happens like instantly. So it's obvious what happened and he even knows what happened. But I do think it's a good example. And again, the way you treat this is by becoming aware of what happened and working through it. And they have kind of like a funny take on that as well. So I'll play this for you. I think it's a good, a pretty decent example. He goes through it through therapy and it would take some time to come back, just like it took some time to develop, but still like probably one of the more decent representations of it that I've seen. So again, with conversion disorder, much more dramatic than the next one. It is usually like a larger symptom or something more hysterically based, but you're converting something emotional into a physical symptom, and then it reverses once you've dealt with that emotion and that trauma. Before I move on to the next one, any other thoughts or Questions or comments or anything about that one? Yeah, Jake, what's up?
Anything with that, in that involves being a little makes my day.
Okay.
I always find like random clips of people being a little and super really funny. I just find them hilarious.
It was a funny show, offensively funny.
Yeah.
That's okay. So the next one is much less severe, but it's much more common, right? Somatic symptom disorder, which has two different patterns, means like body symptoms, right? Soma is body. So with this one, people has a bunch of different like bodily symptoms happening that are driven by like stress or anxiety or like emotion. And they tend to be way less dramatic. They're more common stuff, and they're very commonly mistaken for like medical issues, right? So the first one, somatization pattern, which used to be called somatization disorder, has a bunch of like physical ailments that aren't caused by anything organic or physical. So they aren't caused by like a physical issue, they're caused by emotional issues. That's the essence with all of these. So in order to have somatization pattern, here, somatization pattern, you have to have a couple of different symptoms. You have to have a severe pain symptom. So you have some kind of pain, a headache, stomach ache, part of your body is hurting, and there's nothing physically wrong with you to cause that. Again, it's coming from emotional stuff. Really common, we talked about trauma last time. People who have things like CPTSD, that chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, oftentimes have pain symptoms that might persist throughout their life that aren't caused by anything medical, they're caused by psychological factors. It's really common to see that. So you have a pain symptom. You also have a gastrointestinal symptom. Something with your stomach, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, like some kind of like gastrointestinal stomach related problem that you're having constantly. Irritable bowel syndrome might be another way that this manifests. So something going on with your stomach, pain and a stomach issue. You also have a sexual symptom. Maybe difficulty getting an erection, difficulty becoming aroused, right? This is like the theme of the day. We've had a lot of sexuality today so far, right? But you have some kind of sexual symptom, menstrual difficulties, irregular menstrual cycles. So you have all of these things happening. Again, none of them caused by something physical. Yeah.
You say all of them are like all at once?
Yeah. Or like,
You have to have all of these symptoms.
Yeah.
To be this.
yes. And they're like typically less. So they're not like, they don't have to be really dramatic or drastic, but they're all present. So it might not be that you have them all like in the moment, but over like the course of 6 months, you're having all of them present at some point, if that makes sense. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean like in the moment you have everything happening, but over 6 months, they're all happening at some point. Lastly, you have to have a neurological symptom. Numbness, tingling, loss of sensation in part of your body, or it's some kind of like neurological issue. Okay, so somebody who has all of these things happening on like a lesser level would have somatization pattern, which is also sometimes called Bricket syndrome after the doctor who coined it. Now, it might be easy to miss this because you might think, well, like, oh, I have pain, yeah, I'm having headaches. Like, okay, and that would feel totally separate from stomach aches and totally separate from something else, right? So you might go to multiple different doctors for different issues and miss this entirely, right? And what would happen is they typically don't find a good explanation for what's going on because there's something else bigger that's accounting for it all. Now, this one is really like straightforward. Predominant pain pattern is when someone has pain that is disproportionate to what's going on. So maybe they have like way more severe pain or it lasts longer, but they're having pain that's not related to anything physical. It's caused or maintained by something psychological. And again, with everything up here, you aren't aware that you're doing it and it's not in any way on purpose. Okay. And once you are aware of it, it oftentimes will go away once you work through the emotions that are connected to it. Questions or anything before we talk about the opposite of this? Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No, go
It's
finish.
just like, I'm like. Something.
So maybe somebody has like, something that happened that would cause them to have pain, right? Like they injured part of their body, but the pain lasts longer, or it's more severe than it should be. Or they require like more treatment for it than like maybe is necessary due to something emotional, like maybe they're being rewarded for it, they don't quite get the connection. Or it's like an attention kind of thing, but it's again, it's not purposefully driven, but it would be that like, maybe you don't recover from something, in the timing that you should, and it just kind of persists. And so you have pain that's caused by something emotional rather than physical.
Like, if you, let's say like. Could it be something that was like, so? something
Yeah.
was- Yeah.
So it could have roots in like, yeah.
And then you have this past, everyone wants to say the past and blah, 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 then you get your past off,
Yeah,
and then we'll start paying attention to you, really, like, is there a chance your brain could sort of like.
Yeah.
having, like broken arm, like symptoms,
Mhm.
and like search for more attention?
yes, so that's exactly it, but again, completely not on purpose,
Yeah.
but yeah. Versus you could do it on purpose, which is what we'll talk about next. Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Yeah. So being sick is more like the next one that we're talking. But it, like, this one's usually, this one, the second one here is pain, 100% pain. Versus this one is like all those different symptoms. When people, like exaggerate illnesses, we'll get to that in a bit, it's like illness anxiety disorder. There's a couple of ones that relate to sickness specifically. All right. So different from the disorders featuring somatic symptoms, there are disorders called factitious, sometimes fictitious, I've heard it both ways, disorders, right? So remember, all of the ones that we talked about, like those hysterical / somatoform disorders, completely unintentional, not on purpose, you're not even aware that you're doing it, versus factitious or fictitious disorder is when you purposefully fake something for a reason. Okay, now let's be honest. I know that I've done this. I guarantee every single one of you at some point in your life have pretended to be sick to get out of something, right? Like you have that test or you don't want to go to work. You're like, it's so easy these last 3 years, right? Like, oh yes, I have COVID, I can't come, right? Like so easy. It's too easy to be sick now, right? But it's very common to fake something to get out of something or to get attention, maybe sympathy or care. I remember when I was little, back before like digital thermometers, I didn't want to go to school one day because we had to run the mile. I didn't want to do it. And so I pretended that I was sick and my mom put the thermometer in my mouth and walked out the door. And I put it up to the light bulb so it'd get nice and hot so I'd have a good fever. She came back, she's like, 106, you should be dead. Right. And I was like, oh, I put it on there too long, right? And I had to go to school. And I was really sad. And I had to run the mile and whatever. But like, it's that mentality, right? Of like, you want to get out of something, so you fake being sick. Or you want somebody to take care of you, so you pretend to be sick. Or you exaggerate a sick role a little bit longer. That is actually really common. But when you start doing it repeatedly for attention, and maybe you even start upping the ante or put yourself in danger or cause harm to yourself to get attention, is when it becomes a disorder. So people who have factitious disorder, this is commonly known as Munchausen syndrome. Okay, so if you've heard of Munchausen syndrome, that's the popular name for this disorder. They're the same thing. One's like a popular name and one's the technical name. Kind of like a sociopath and psychopath are the popular names for antisocial personality disorder. So if somebody's repeatedly faking illness, or even going as far as to make themselves sick or injured to get attention, we call that factitious disorder or Munchausen syndrome. I had a client once whose boyfriend was about to break up with her. So she walked in front of a car in a parking lot so that it would hit her and she would be injured enough that he would have to stay and take care of her. And it worked. He didn't leave her because he felt bad for her. And this was something she had done her whole life, like faking illness or hurting herself to get attention or care or sympathy. There was a hand over here. So yeah. Yeah, so like Sixth Sense style, like an old movie, right? But like if a parent poisons a child or makes a child sick for attention, we call that Munchausen by proxy. So when you make somebody else sick, so that people feel bad for you, because it's usually like a child fear thing, that's Munchausen by proxy. Means that to another person. Yeah. There's another hand, there was a, yeah.
I knew this girl in school who for herself to get attention.
Yeah.
And there was one time in school with her, she was talking about how her parents were being mean to her, knowing life during all this. And we were at the top of some stairs, and she literally watched this and threw herself
Wow.
down the stairs. And I was just like, she had a broken foot. And I had to call like, out and then
Yeah.
I told the principal like what had happened.
Wow.
And she had to go to like culture's doctors and all that, but I was like, you threw yourself downstairs.
That's intense. Yeah, and talk about commitment too, to like getting that attention. But that's the problem is people learn like that the only way they can get the care and attention that they feel like they need is through being sick or being a sick role or like being hurt or injured in some way. And so they slowly tend to up the ante, right? It oftentimes starts small and then people stop paying attention to the small. So they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then sometimes it can even transition to doing it to another person if people stop paying attention to them. It's really like, they can even start to believe the lies. Like sometimes it's lying, and just kind of knowing and looking things up. Other times it can be, something more where like you literally make yourself sick or hurt yourself, in order to receive attention. I have an example of this really quickly that I'll play for you. Such a funny movie, the Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights. He gets in a really bad thing to be paralyzed because there's a gain that comes from it, like sympathy. He doesn't have to race anymore, right? And people like feel bad for him and take care of him, right? And that's something that happens a lot with this. Now, I have somebody in my life who is like very much this way. I'll tell you a story. Her name is Kim with a Y, right? I don't know why that matters, but it does, right? So I just feel like it sets the stage, right? So you know the song we don't talk about Bruno? Like, sorry to put that in your head. Right? But in our house, it's like we don't talk about Kim, no, like I don't know, like we just don't talk about this person anymore. But my partner has a sister named Kim, okay, 10 years older than her older sister. Now, when we first started dating, which was 20 years ago, like we've been together 20 years, a long time, right? 20 years ago, I was meeting her family for the first time. And she's like, I want you to meet my sister. Right. And I was like, oh, great. Like she has two sisters. One's totally like sweet and kind and normal. And then there's Kim with a Y, right? Like again. So Kim, she's all like, so she has like, how did she say it? She's like, she has like a brain tumor, but don't worry about it. It's fine. I was like, that's cold. Okay. Like, she's like, she doesn't really. I'm like, well, but does she have a tumor or not? And she's like, no one knows, but this is Kim. And I was like, I was so confused because there was no context to it. It was like hurried before I met this person. It was like, she has a brain tumor, but not really, don't worry about it. Like, okay. So I meet Kim and like, I hear all about like all of her brain tumor issues and procedures and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I'm like, that's awful. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know this person. I'm like, that's cool. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Like, what's the prognosis? What are you doing? And on and on and on. I mean, this person was so excited to tell me everything. Right. And like, afterward, I go up to my partner and I'm like, that's so sad. Like, your sister only has like 6 months till you didn't tell me any of this. She's like, no. Let me back up and tell you the whole story. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, there's more to, why didn't you tell me this earlier? Like, come on. And so she tells me this whole story. She's like, so she's had a brain tumor for like 6 months. Before that, she had kidney cancer. Before that, she had epilepsy. Before that, she had this and that. She's like, you just watch. In a couple months, it'll be gone. Like nothing will happen from it. Like she is lying. Like this is completely made up. And I was like, oh, okay, good. I'm glad you told me now. I thought you were just really cold. I'm like, I hope I never get like a brain tumor one day. Right? So it turned out this person, Kim, had made up stories like this her whole life. Like she made up pregnancies. They threw her a baby shower for a pregnancy that never happened. right? That she just lost the baby. Like she never gained any weight, like other than like she's a very like heavy set person, but like had a baby and lost it, right? Had like kidney cancer and it went away, had epilepsy, it went away, brain tumor went away, like issue after issue after issue. And all of it was made up. But she knew everything about it, like knew every little symptom, the doctors, the treatments, all of it. And then eventually the family stopped responding, which is what you kind of have to do, as cold as it seems. Like the family stopped responding because it was so chronic and so not true, right? But then she had a kid, and Kim's daughter ended up in the hospital for the first 3 weeks of her life, like deathly sick. This kid's always in the hospital. And all I can think is she's moved on to her child, right? But this person, Kim, like, we don't like even talk to her anymore. It's been so damaging for like the family, has like done so many of these different things over time, pretending to have these illnesses and things that never actually manifested. And that tends to be how it starts. Like somebody starts with like a cold or something small, like a little sickness. And then they escalate it because people no longer feel bad for them for something here. So it gets worse and worse and worse. And then sometimes even moving on to another person. Yeah.
She's younger. And I think that she like developed something like this when he died because she was really close to him, and ever since then, she like diagnoses herself with everything.
Yeah.
Like she came gluten, dairy, wheat, like all these other things that she could have eaten her whole life. She goes to the doctor like twice a week.
Yeah.
All her back hurts. Like she needs to. She sleeps until like 1 p.m. every day. Like she's just like fully diagnosing herself with everything since he died.
Yeah. Right. And it could be this, or it could be, we'll get to it later, when people are like have illness anxiety or they're like a hypochondriac. But yeah, I mean, if none of it is actually grounded in anything, then it's definitely this. Like it's often for attention and sympathy and care. The Munchausen was a famous baron, like Baron von Munchausen. He was known for his tall tales and like fabulous stories that he would tell. And that's where the name comes from. I have a video of this too. I don't know if any of you ever watched the show Untold Stories of the ER. Really interesting like show. I tried to edit it down as best as I could to this one guy and this one case. But it's very directly related to this, and I think it's fascinating. Yeah. With a kid, yeah. It can be hard to catch, right? But I will tell you as a parent, anytime you bring a child to the emergency room, there's always a social worker or like a child protective services person who comes in and checks on the situation, regardless of what it is. Like we took our daughter Emma to the emergency room a few years ago for like a urinary tract infection. She had a fever, and social workers came in. And they're always just kind of like gauging the situation. Like it was a very quick like assessment and then they left. It was nothing like chronic or big deal. But like when people are going repeatedly, it's a red flag. When people are getting worse, when the parents are visiting and around, it could be another red flag. But it can be difficult to catch, especially if somebody knows what they're doing, right? And they're like poisoning or making their child sick in a very like subtle, covert way. It could be very hard to catch it. For sure. Okay, so let me play this clip for you. And I'm sorry about the, like, again, I tried